Let's move on, though, to the wide receiver position here on the Fantasy Flex on the Action Network podcast. Samantha, one of the guys you have is a Steelers wide receiver up at the top. And I want to ask you because a week or two ago, we talked about Pickens, another Steelers wide receiver. And I said I thought that would be great connected to Kenny Pickett because they were both working with the twos. Then all of a sudden, Pickett gets hurt. Mitch Trubisky comes back. And then on key third down situations, it was Trubisky looking for this guy who you say could be an interesting one on the waiver wire.
Yeah, Chase Claypool obviously was phenomenal. It looked like it was a very tough matchup on paper against the Bucs, but he caught all 7 of his targets for 96 yards to a touchdown. This was by far his best game of the year. He is the wide receiver 5.5 PPR heading into Monday night. Tied Deontay Johnson for targets, outshined Johnson and Pickens, to your point. I mean, I would be wary of going all in on Claypool based on one game, though. Like, this is a guy that I'm not totally sold on. I mean, it is a juicy matchup coming up against the Dolphins, whose pass defense has been pretty bad, have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. So he's kind of like a risk reward type guy, but like his whole career, he's just been that boom or bust type guy. Like he has a 3 touchdown game and then you never see him again. So I don't know if that's what's happening here, but I'm not willing to go, half my fab budget for this guy. Maybe if you want to toss a couple dollars and you're really lean at the position, but he's not really my favorite ad. I would say Rondale Moore in the near term, we talked about him, would be probably the preferred higher priority ad. He's 46% rostered. So he's out there in just over half of the leagues. He has definitely been a target hog, like I said, and Brown's out, so it looks like a good situation, at least for the next couple weeks. Alec Pierce and Paris Campbell actually both had good games. Now, to Mike's point, this could be chasing some points here, just because there wasn't really much to suggest that Campbell was going to have a good game. He just kind of came out of nowhere. Pierce, though, has been trending in the right direction. 4 straight games with 8 or more fantasy points in half PPR. So, I mean, I liked him as a prospect. I think he's just an exciting type player. He's a big guy. So they face the Titans. We already talked about that matchup. That'll be a good one. So I like him there. And then Tyquan Thornton, this was his 2nd game of his NFL career. Caught the touchdown. It actually was used as a running back a little bit too. So he did miss the first couple games of the year with a fractured clavicle. But I don't know if you guys remember this. He ran an unofficial 4.21 at the combine, which was going to be like a combine record. It was later ruled a 4.28. But I mean, obviously, clearly just a speed demon. So if the Patriots actually look pretty good with Bailey Zappi under center. I don't know if this is just like a reinvigorated offense or whatever, but Tyquan Thornton could have some deeper league appeal, especially if you play in any kind of like keeper format. I would really like to roster him there.
Yeah, but just like you said, a reinvigorated offense could just be because they were facing the Cleveland Browns defense. Ramondre Stevenson went off.
This is true.
Remember, Austin Eckler the week before that, I think, ran for like 170 plus. So we'll see about that. Hey, Mike, before I have a question for you for inside knowledge, but before we get into that, any wide receivers that you're intrigued by on the radar here on the waiver wire?
Yeah, I feel bad. I mentioned last week that I really wanted to like Alec Pierce, but couldn't trust the Colts offense enough since they couldn't even get Michael Pittman going. Little did I know that they were going to throw for 389 yards and get every receiver going. So I agree with Samantha on Rondale Moore being the one I would pick up this week, but both Alec Pierce and maybe Wan'Dale Robinson as long-term stashes if you don't need to start someone this week and you want to keep watching them. I was a little surprised. My old colleague at ESPN, Jordan Ronan, has seen so many receivers come and go in New York. I thought he might poo-poo a hot day for Robinson, but instead he went out and he said, here's my fantasy advice. Go get Wan'Dale Robinson because, he thinks he's an actual talent that was only held back from the games he missed and might be a guy who quickly emerges in this receiving course. So that makes him kind of interesting. And another one, this is the absolute boring pick, safe pick, but maybe if you're in a really deep league, Zay Jones just keeps being clearly the number 2 receiver in Jacksonville. I mean, he's getting the touches, he's getting the snaps, he's getting the targets. So that's a little different than some of these other places where we're trying to figure out 3 and 4 guys keep taking turns. Zay Jones is always their top 2 guy.
No, that's true. And listen, Jacksonville is going to be a kind of throwing offense with Trevor Lawrence, Doug Peterson at the helm, right? And so I can see them being in some negative game script games as well coming up, looking for Zay Jones. What I wanted to ask you though, Mike, I had this thesis, right,
All
that we
right.
talked about here that, oh, Kenny Pickett equals George Pickens because they work together in training camp. They practice together with the twos. And then, Mitchell Trubisky, he looks to his familiar target in Chase Claypool. Is there any merit to that in general? I know it's a case-by-case basis, Mike, but is there any merit to the fact that these guys do build chemistry with the kind of ones or twos that they practice with? And if they get out there on Sundays, they look for the kind of familiar set of hands. Is that plausible? Do you hear about that, when you're around in the NFL, that there are guys who get more familiarity or a better chemistry with certain guys and then go to it when they get, kind of the chance?
No, I think it's absolutely plausible. And exactly in the scenario you said, when the second string quarterback has been working with the second string receivers all summer long. That was a little different in New Orleans, but Andy Dalton talked about, feeling, Jameis Winston missed a lot of time this offseason with an ACL injury. So he said when Andy Dalton got thrown into the game, he said, I actually got to work with these guys a lot this offseason, and that made a huge difference in my transition being with my first year with the team. I think you hear that very often when you see, and I'm trying to think now if that has been the case with anyone that Bailey Zappi's been going to in New England, because whoever Bailey Zappi is throwing to, it's working right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, the Jets have gone from Joe Flacco back to Zach Wilson, and Mr. Elijah Moore has not been targeted as much. And he had something to say about that, although he tried to couch it in the context of how he's saying something, but still not saying anything and being a good teammate. I've got one last wide receiver to throw out there, and it's going to sound really, really ugly. We talked about guys coming back, DeAndre Hopkins, for example, on 87% of rosters. There's a guy coming back, I believe, from IR, who's only on 3% of rosters. And I'm talking about Green Bay Packers wide receiver Sammy Watkins, okay? We see that the Packers cannot figure out what they want to do at the wide receiver position. We see that Aaron Rodgers does not build trust with young wide receivers very quickly. I could see a universe where when Sammy Watkins comes back, he does all of a sudden become the number 2 targeted guy behind Allen Lazard, just because Aaron Rodgers trusts the veteran to know where he's going to be on certain routes. Remember, he got hurt a few weeks ago. He is slated to return off of injured reserve in the next week or two as well. So just another name to throw out there. But with that,
he is slated to return from injured reserve is like an evergreen statement for Sammy Watkins. Okay,
that's true. That's true.
If he can stay on the
we'll play
field,
it again next year.
So if he can stay on the field, I mean, that's one thing. But it's also not week 1. That's the only week that he can do anything apparently.